Detail everything you have learnt from using technology. Before this process, I had no knowledge of how to use any of the technology that we use to create our radio news broadcast. This included using a dictaphone, a microphone, Adobe Premiere Pro and Adobe Audition. I learnt how to record using a dictaphone and also how to use a microphone in the correct way in order to make sure the sound was of good quality by using a pop filter. I also learnt how to use Adobe Premiere Pro correctly. Using this software, I learnt how to annotate over recordings to explain them, and I learnt how to export these videos onto YouTube. Learning how to use Adobe Audition was also useful, as I learnt how to edit, cut and merge together different types of recording and sound. We used this software to edit our jingle and radio broadcast as a whole. List any technical difficulties you encountered. After we had recorded our radio news broadcast, we realised that we had not used the microphone properly, as the sound quality was not of good quality, and our voices kept popping and sounded grainy. This was because we had not used the pop filter. On realising this mistake, we quickly re-recorded our radio news broadcast so it sounded of better quality. Another technical difficulty we encountered was, when recording our radio broadcast, you could hear sounds of doors opening and closing which we thought sounded unprofessional. To tackle this problem, we used a sound bed underneath the presenter's voice in order to block out any background sounds. What software or hardware did you use? We used Adobe Audition to mainly cut and edit our radio news broadcast in order for it to flow. We used Adobe Premiere Pro for our preliminary task, where we exported videos to YouTube and annotated over videos to explain them. Did you realise so much work went into creating similar media products? No, I did not realise that so much work went into creating similar media products, as I have realised that there is a lot involved and a lot which goes into creating radio broadcasts, especially when radio stations broadcast news every day. Assess your technical skills. Are there any sections or edits you are really proud of? I am particularly proud of learning how to use Adobe Audition, as I used this skill to fade in sounds and edit and merge parts of our radio broadcast, which I thought I did well. What would you do differently to improve or alter your product? If I had the chance to alter my product, I think I would improve our jingle, as I felt we rushed it, and I felt that if we had spent more time on it, we could have made it better and more relevant to our radio news broadcast. Were there any limitations to your creativity? Yes, I felt that if we had access to more sound effects and music material when creating our jingle, then we could have improved our radio news broadcast to make it sound more professional.
Our radio news broadcast, using such things as an industry standard microphone, dictaphone, Adobe Premiere and Audition. Learning to record using a dictaphone and a microphone in the correct way was easy, as I used a pop filter in order to prevent any excessive sounds when I spoke. I also learned how to use Adobe Premiere Pro. This program was used to create annotations over recordings to explain the codes and conventions of radio. I then used the program to convert and export these videos onto YouTube. Learning how to use Adobe Audition was also useful, as I learned how to edit, cut and merge together different types of recording and sound. We use this software to edit our jingle and radio broadcast to the appropriate standard. Did you realise so much work went into creating similar media products? When we first began the task of creating our radio broadcast, we had some idea of the work that went into them due to the preliminary task that we did prior to the main coursework piece. Having done a preliminary task, we had some experience with the main recording and editing that was required to make our product into an industry standard product that seems official. However, it was still quite a big workload. It took a lot of time to get it to the standard that we approved of. Would you do differently or to improve to alter your product? If I was to alter our broadcast, I would probably redo the jingle, as this sounded quite sketchy and rushed. It is an important part of the broadcast, as it is the first thing that the listeners will hear when the programme begins. Therefore, it needs to be of high quality and reflect the style of our station. To improve on this, I would need more access to the music and sound effects. This was an issue, as I only had access to some royalty-free sources of sound.
Is that it? Well done. Detail everything you have learnt from using technology. Throughout the production of our first radio broadcast, I have learnt many individual things needed to produce a professional piece of work. First of all, I learnt that the microphone choice is very important, because in order for it to sound good, the microphone needs to be of good quality. You can't record with a cheap microphone and even a dictaphone, because the overall sound quality would have been a lot lower, and it wouldn't have sounded as good as it turned out. The pop filter attached to the front of the microphone is also very important, because without this, we would have picked up sounds throughout that we would have that would have made it distort and we would have had a grainy finish to the end product. List any technical difficulties you encountered. We encountered a lot of difficulties throughout the production of our first radio broadcast. First of all, it took a while to get used to the software in the recording room. We had to overcome a number of errors that led to us re-recording. The software, being Pro Tools Express, was at points very slow, and it meant that our work took longer to record than expected. Also, on the topic of the software in the recording room, it was very complicated first time around using it. We didn't quite get to grips with how to record and stop, but eventually we got used to it and started recording. What software and hardware did you use? We used a couple of softwares throughout the production of our radio broadcast. First of all, to put it all together, we used a software called Adobe Audition. This was a software that was very easy to get used to, and once we had all had the hang of it, it was a quick process in which we put all of our recordings together. When it came to recording it all, we used a software called Pro Tools Express. This was quite tricky to get to terms with at first sighting, but once we had got the hang of it, it was a very quick process recording it all and even re-recording whenever needed. It did let us down a few times, but overall it was a software that was very successful. Assess your technical skills. Are there any sections or edits you are really proud of? I think that my technical skills throughout the editing process were very successful. When it came to cropping down individual recordings, we all made sure it sounded professional enough to be kept. Combining the clips together was a strong point throughout my editing process. I made sure I listened to it all again and made sure it sounded good enough to be cropped down to a new size. Did you realise so much work went into creating similar media products? No, I didn't realise that so much work went into creating similar media products, as I have realised that there is a lot involved and a lot which goes into creating radio broadcasts, especially when radio stations broadcast news every day. What would you do differently to improve or alter your product? I think if we were to do our radio broadcasts again, I personally think that we would spend more time recording to make it flow better, and all of our news headlines could have been more suitable for the target audience. Were there any limitations to your creativity? I think that we could have got more sound clips for our radio jingle instead of using the ones we were provided with through the non-copyright websites. I've looked that up a few times, didn't I?
So I'm quite proud of that. I'm also proud of the soundbed that we created and like cutting different sections and then combining them all together for a whole broadcast. I'm quite proud of the editing myself. I'm also quite proud of the script that we helped make. So, yep. Detail everything you have learnt from using technology. Before this topic, I had no knowledge of using any equipment such as the dictaphone, microphone, Adobe Audition, Adobe Premiere, things like that. However, now I've learnt how to use all the equipment such as a dictaphone and where to stand when you're on the microphone, to stand quite far back so your words aren't coming out vigorously and too pronounced. I've also learnt how to use the different softwares and hardwares such as Adobe Audition and Premiere, because now I know how to edit and use all the different aspects from that, such as fade in, sound beds, stuff like this. I've also learnt how to create a radio jingle, and this is very important because this is the whole thing that sets the scene with the radio broadcast, and you get a certain tone and feel when you're creating with the jingle. Like the audience straight away knows what type of broadcast it's going to be, either if it's going to be serious or sad or happy, for example. So yeah, list any technical difficulties you've encountered. Well, about towards the end of the whole section, we had a technical difficulty such as the pop shield with the microphone, and this is because with the pop shield, it's meant to basically remove all the bad stuff that you don't want to hear, such as crackling, and it only picks up your voice. But with this is why it was a technical difficulty for us, because it picked up words which were pronounced too much, and it also picked up background noise such as doors closing, and this meant that we needed to re-record the whole radio broadcast, and this meant that it didn't run as smoothly and how we wanted it to run, because we was obviously limited in time. But overall it sounded better once we re-recorded it, because we got rid of all the irrelevant noises and the words were running smoothly and they weren't pronounced too much. So was a technical difficulty for us. what software and hardware did you use? The software and hardware used were Adobe Premiere and Adobe Audition, and with this it meant that with Adobe Premiere we learned how to edit, and this was really the core of our radio broadcast because we got to cut different sections and fade different sections. So basically the whole of the broadcast was structured within this software really. And with Adobe Audition it meant that we could basically export our radio broadcast, our files, and we could edit them, and on top of it and basically state the different codes and conventions that we use within our broadcast, and also what we could specifically work on next time, such as the jingle. That would put an edit on the jingle and say we could improve this next time. Did you realise so much work went creating similar media products? Realistically, no, I didn't understand how much work went in creating these media products, and specifically the jingle, because that took a few weeks for us to really come across and really get it right, to be fair. And also the whole of the actual interview was, because getting an interview was fairly difficult, because ours was Paul Hurst from Grimsby Town Manager, and that took quite long to get an interview with him. And also the vox pops in getting the public to answer our questions, that was hard because most of the public aren't really confident themselves, that we interviewed obviously, to give us a strong answer, so it was quite hard and took quite a lot of time to get the vox pops. And also overall the whole radio broadcast, such as the editing, took a lot of time to actually make, because there was little snippets that we needed to cut out, and such as door shuts, door slams, and when the actual interview went on too much and we needed to cut that last bit so it sounded more professional and stuff. But yeah, I didn't really realise how much work and time went into creating these radio broadcasts.